The rain hit the glass walls of the Smith estate like it had been waiting for this moment, angry, relentless, and cold. Lightning carved through the night sky, turning the marble floors into mirrors of pale fire. Kendra Hall stood in the center of the grand foyer, still wearing her maid's uniform, its white collar stained from tears she hadn't meant to shed. Across from her, Peter Smith stood in his charcoal suit, tie loosened, his jaw locked in the kind of silence that made people afraid to breathe. "You need to leave," he said finally, voice low but sharp enough to cut through thunder. Kendra's fingers twisted around the edge of her apron. "Peter, please." "Don't," he snapped, eyes flashing. "Don't say my name like that. Not after what happened." She flinched, but her voice didn't break. "What happened was real. You were hurting. I didn't plan it. Neither of us did." He laughed, a sound without humor. "Real? You think a mistake like that was real?" He turned away, pacing, hands buried in his pockets as if he could hide his shame in the dark fabric. "You work for me, Kendra. You clean my floors, serve my guests." That night, he exhaled hard. That night should never have happened. Her heart dropped like glass slipping from a counter. She'd known he might regret it, but she hadn't imagined he would erase it. "So that's what I am to you now," she whispered. "A mistake." Peter turned toward her, eyes cold. "You took advantage of a moment when I wasn't thinking clearly." "I took advantage." Kendra's voice rose before she could stop it. "You came to me. You said you were tired of people pretending around you. You said I was the only one who saw you as human." For a heartbeat, his mask cracked, just a flicker of truth in his gaze, but then it hardened again. "You're fired," he said flatly. "Pack your things and leave before morning." The words hit her harder than the thunder outside. "You can't mean that." "I do." He walked to the door and opened it himself, the storm's wind sweeping through the foyer like a ghost come to collect what was owed. "You'll get 3 months' pay. That's more than fair." She stared at him, unable to believe this was the same man who had once looked at her like she was the only calm in his storm. "Peter," she said softly, "if you want to pretend that night didn't happen, fine. But don't throw me away because you're afraid someone will see you felt something." He didn't look at her. "Good night, Kendra." The door closed between them with a sound that felt final. Outside, the rain drenched her within seconds. She didn't run. She walked, each step heavy, her shoes sinking into the gravel driveway. The mansion's lights glowed behind her like a memory she would never enter again. It had begun on a night much like this one, with thunder rolling low over the city and loneliness sitting heavy in the corners of every room. Kendra had been polishing glassware in the dining hall when she'd heard Peter arguing with someone on the phone, his lawyer maybe. Words like inheritance, merger, and hospital echoed down the hall. Then silence, followed by a crash of glass. When she peeked in, Peter was standing over the shattered remains of a whiskey tumbler, his usually perfect composure fractured. His father was dying. She learned later that the doctors had called it hopeless. "Sir, are you all right?" she'd asked carefully. He'd looked up at her with eyes she'd never seen so raw. "Do I look all right?" It should have been a warning to leave. But she didn't. She stepped forward, kneeling to pick up the broken glass before he could cut his hand. "You shouldn't have to clean up after me," he said bitterly. "It's my job," she'd replied softly. "No," he said, voice cracking. "Your job isn't to make me feel like less of a man." She looked up then, glass still in her palm, meeting his gaze. "Then stop acting like one who doesn't need help." Something in him broke at that. The walls he lived behind collapsed in silence, and in that collapse he reached for her, not as an employer, but as a man drowning who finally found someone willing to dive in after him. The kiss was desperate, unplanned, soaked in grief and gratitude and longing neither of them could name. One moment she was wiping tears from his cheek, the next his lips were on hers, tasting of whiskey and regret. She could have stopped it. So could he. But neither did. That night, she stayed in the guest wing, not as a maid, but as the woman who made him forget the world's cruelty for a few stolen hours. He had held her like she was the only real thing he'd ever known. And when dawn came, he was gone. By the time she stepped into the hall, he was already dressed for a board meeting, mask back in place. His eyes flickered toward her once, blank and unreadable. "Kendra," he said briskly, "what happened last night was a lapse in judgment. It won't happen again." She'd stood frozen, holding the sheets around her like armor. A lapse. It was wrong, he continued, avoiding her gaze. Forget it happened. But she couldn't forget. Not when every heartbeat echoed his name. That morning, she went to work as if nothing had changed. He didn't speak to her for days, not even a greeting. Then 1 week later, she was summoned to the foyer, tonight, and told to leave. Back to the present, the rain had turned into a downpour. Kendra walked until the lights of the estate disappeared behind trees and fences, until her tears were indistinguishable from the storm. She reached the bus stop at the edge of the road, her suitcase soaked through, her heart heavier than the bag she carried. The last bus had left hours ago. So she sat on the bench, shivering, the night pressing in. In her pocket, her phone buzzed, a message from the head housekeeper. "I'm sorry, Kendra. Mr. Smith gave strict orders. I can't help you this time." She typed and deleted a dozen replies before turning the phone off. Above her, lightning split the sky again. For a second, the whole world was white, and in that blinding flash she saw herself clearly, tired, humiliated, but still standing. When the rain eased, she stood and looked back one last time. Somewhere beyond those walls, Peter would be staring into his glass again, convincing himself he had done the right thing. He hadn't. She pressed a trembling hand against her stomach, where a faint unease had begun days earlier. She didn't know it yet, not fully, but life was already changing inside her. Later that night, Peter sat alone in his study, the fire burning low, his reflection fractured in the whiskey glass. His hands trembled slightly as he poured another drink he didn't need. He told himself it was guilt. That he'd only fired her to protect his reputation, his company, his name. That what happened between them would have destroyed everything he'd built. But deep down, beneath layers of arrogance and fear, he knew the truth. He had fired her because she made him feel human, and he didn't know how to handle that. He stared at the rain-soaked driveway where her taxi had once waited, where now there was only darkness. For the first time in years, Peter Smith, the billionaire everyone envied, felt small. He didn't know it yet, but this night would become the scar his empire couldn't hide. The night he threw away the only woman who had ever loved him without a price tag. The night finally broke into a bruised morning. A pale sun clawed through the clouds, washing the world in gray. Kendra Hall trudged down the empty street with her small suitcase, each step heavier than the last. Behind her, the Smith estate disappeared into mist like a memory that refused to stay sharp. She didn't cry anymore. There was nothing left to cry for. By the time she reached the bus terminal, her uniform clung to her like second skin. The driver looked at her once, hesitated, then waved her in without asking for the full fare. Maybe he saw the heartbreak on her face. Maybe he saw a girl trying to outrun something she couldn't name. Kendra sat by the window, head against the glass, watching the city shrink into distance. She whispered to the reflection staring back at her, "I'll never let him see me cry again." The first time she suspected, she was cleaning an office in a downtown high-rise, part of a night shift crew. The smell of disinfectant made her nauseous. Twice she had to run to the restroom, trembling over the sink. When the doctor confirmed it, pregnant, 7 weeks, she just sat there in stunned silence. The hum of the clinic lights sounded like thunder again. Peter's face flashed through her mind. The coldness, the dismissal, the way he said "you're fired." She could have gone to him. She could have told him the truth. But the memory of that door closing was louder than any reason to stay. She smiled through the tears. "All right, little one," she whispered, hand on her stomach. "Looks like it's just us now." She didn't know yet there were two. Kendra moved into a small apartment on the east side, the kind with peeling paint and water that ran rusty for 10 seconds before clearing. She took every job she could find, cleaning offices by night, working as a hotel housekeeper by day. Her body ached, but she kept moving. She whispered to the life inside her that one day, they would have better. When the twins arrived, a boy and a girl, she named them Eli and Aria. She stared at them in the hospital's dim light, exhausted and euphoric, and realized that love could be silent and infinite at once. For the first time since that night, she wasn't afraid. Motherhood sharpened her. The exhaustion became discipline, the loneliness became drive. She started her own small cleaning agency, Hall and Shine, built from nothing but flyers and reputation. Her first clients were ordinary families, but word spread fast. People loved her precision, her reliability, her quiet kindness. Within months she had employees, uniforms, contracts. Then came a moment of serendipity. A real estate investor noticed her eye for detail and asked if she'd consider managing his rental properties. She didn't hesitate. Management turned into logistics. Logistics turned into consulting. Kendra learned to read balance sheets at night while her twins slept in a crib beside her desk. The same woman Peter had dismissed as just a maid was teaching herself to run an empire. By the twins' third birthday, Kendra owned a modest office and 5 employees. Her company handled luxury property maintenance, small-scale renovation, and financial coordination. She had stepped from labor into leadership. Her clients, wealthy, careless, entitled, reminded her of him. She never said his name aloud, but every success felt like reclaiming a piece of what he'd taken. When people underestimated her, she smiled. It was the same smile she'd worn the night she walked into the rain. Sometimes, when Arya tilted her head or Eli frowned with concentration, she caught Peter's expression echoed in their small faces. The resemblance hurt and healed all at once. "Your father was a lesson," she told them one night while tucking them in. "And lessons make us stronger." They didn't understand, but someday they would. By now, Hall and Shine had evolved into the Hall Group, a consultancy specializing in luxury property recovery, helping corporations rescue failing assets. Irony dripped through her success. She now fixed the kind of companies men like Peter broke. She wore tailored suits instead of aprons, heels instead of flats. Her voice, once soft from fear, carried the calm authority of someone who had earned every inch of her power. One evening, she stood at the window of her new office, a glass tower overlooking downtown Los Angeles. The city pulsed below, alive and endless. Eli and Arya played quietly on the rug behind her, coloring with the same crayons she once used to mark cleaning schedules. "Mommy, what are you thinking?" Arya asked. "I'm thinking," Kendra said with a smile, "that storms don't always destroy things. Sometimes they clear the sky." Across town, Peter Smith's empire was starting to rot from the inside. The merger he'd built his reputation on was collapsing under fraud allegations. Investors whispered. The board grew restless. He'd been distracted for years, haunted by a face he couldn't forget. The night he fired Kendra replayed in his mind like a scene he couldn't edit. He tried to bury her memory in work, women, and money, but guilt doesn't dissolve in champagne. His assistant once asked what kept him awake at night. He said, "A door I should have never closed." On the twins' 4th birthday, Kendra received an email that made her still. The Smith Group requests a consultation for corporate restructuring. Immediate need. Confidential. The irony stole her breath. For a moment, she thought about deleting it. But something deep inside whispered, "Finish the story." She replied with professional courtesy. "Thank you for reaching out. I'm available Monday at 10 a.m. When she signed her name, she didn't write Kendra Hall, former maid. She wrote Kendra Hall, CEO, the Hall Group. The Monday sun rose clean and merciless. Peter's skyscraper gleamed against the sky, its mirrored surface blinding. Kendra stepped out of the car, every inch of her refined, black-tailored suit, gold pendant, confidence that radiated calm. The receptionist looked up, instantly deferential. "Ms. Hall, they're expecting you in the executive boardroom." Her heels clicked against marble as she walked down the same kind of hallway she once scrubbed for a living. At the boardroom door she paused, not from fear, but from power held steady. Inside, Peter Smith stood waiting. Older, sharper around the eyes, but unmistakably the man who had once broken her heart to save his pride. Their gazes locked. Time didn't rewind, it surrendered. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," she said, voice smooth as silk. He froze, every word dying in his throat. Kendra set her portfolio on the table, the sound echoing through the room like thunder long overdue. "Shall we begin?" For a moment, Peter forgot how to breathe. The woman standing across from him couldn't be the same Kendra Hall he'd once dismissed like a shadow. The maid with tired eyes and quiet hands was gone. In her place stood a woman sculpted from grace and resolve, poised, radiant, untouchable. "Ms. Hall," he managed, his voice rough around the edges. "It's been some time." Kendra smiled, calm, courteous, professional. "4 years, Mr. Smith. I keep track of time. It tends to teach valuable lessons." The boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Around them, a dozen executives pretended not to sense the tension, but every gaze flicked between the two of them like spectators at a duel. Peter gestured stiffly to the chair across from him. "Please sit." She did, smoothly, deliberately, placing her portfolio on the table as though setting down the weight of her past. Her presence filled the room like quiet thunder. He tried to steady himself, to regain control. "You came highly recommended. Your firm's reputation precedes you." Kendra met his gaze. "My reputation is built on cleaning up messes others pretend not to see." It landed like a slap wrapped in silk. Peter cleared his throat. "Then perhaps you can help me. The merger with Arsayer Global fell apart. There are legal complications, investor withdrawals." He talked, words spilling faster than thought, desperate to hide behind the comfort of business jargon. Kendra listened in silence, her eyes never leaving his face. She could see it all, his fatigue, his guilt, the hollowness success couldn't fill. When he finally paused, she closed the file gently. "Mr. Smith," she said, "before we discuss numbers, let's talk about value." Peter frowned. "Value? The kind you can't buy. Integrity, accountability, loyalty. The foundation of every empire, and the first thing to collapse when pride becomes policy." He looked at her sharply. "Are you lecturing me?" She tilted her head slightly. "No. Just identifying the problem. You built an empire so high, you stopped seeing the people holding it up." The room went still. The executives looked down at their notes, pretending to write. Peter exhaled slowly. "If this is about the past." Kendra leaned forward, her tone soft but lethal. "The past doesn't need discussion. It already spoke for itself." Their eyes locked, and for the first time in years, he couldn't look away. After the meeting, Kendra gathered her files and stood. "I'll have my team send over a proposal by morning." Peter rose too quickly. "Wait." The other executives hesitated, exchanging glances before excusing themselves. When the door shut, the air between them thickened. Peter stepped closer, his voice quieter now. "Kendra, I didn't know you'd survive," she interrupted. He swallowed. "Become this." Her expression softened just slightly. "You didn't care enough to imagine it." He winced, as if the words themselves drew blood. "I cared." "No," she said simply. "You were afraid." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. "You were afraid of scandal," she continued. "Afraid of the whispers, the headlines, the judgment. You told yourself it was about protecting your company. But you weren't protecting anything. You were hiding from yourself, from what you felt from me." Her words stripped him bare. He looked smaller than she remembered, still powerful, still polished but hollow. "I've thought about that night," he said finally. "Every day since you left. Then you've wasted 4 years thinking about something you destroyed yourself." She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist, gently, hesitantly, as if afraid she'd vanish if he touched her too firmly. "Kendra, please. Just tell me, did you ever hate me?" She looked down at his hand on hers, then met his eyes. "No. Hate would have meant I still cared enough to wish you pain. I only pitied you." He let go, as though her calmness burned. "Pity," he whispered. "For a man who could have had everything real," she said softly, "and chose something hollow instead." Kendra drove home in silence. The twins were waiting for her, Eli building block towers on the living room floor, Arya drawing suns and stars on scrap paper. "Mommy!" they shouted, running into her arms. The sound of their laughter broke something soft inside her chest. She kissed their foreheads, inhaling their scent of crayons and innocence. "Were you good today?" "Grandma Ramona said we were perfect," Arya declared proudly. Kendra smiled. "Then Grandma was right." Eli tilted his head. "Mommy, why do you look sad?" "I'm not sad," she said, brushing his cheek. "Just thinking." He nodded seriously, as if understanding the weight adults carried. When they went to bed, Kendra stood by their door, watching the rise and fall of their tiny chests in the dark. Her heart swelled with pride and sorrow all at once. Peter didn't know about them. Not yet. But he would. Peter sat in his penthouse, unable to shake her voice from his mind. He replayed every word, every look. The woman he'd humiliated had become the one person powerful enough to save him, and she didn't need him anymore. He poured a drink, then stopped, staring at the glass. He remembered how she'd once picked shards off the floor for him, blood on her fingers, compassion in her eyes. He hadn't deserved her then. He didn't deserve her now. His assistant entered timidly. "Sir, about the Hall Group contract. Ms. Hall requested a reschedule. She'll be bringing her team tomorrow." Peter nodded absently. "Of course. Thank you." When the door closed, he whispered her name into the empty room, like a prayer he wasn't worthy to finish. The next morning, the elevator doors opened, and Peter froze. Kendra stepped out, followed by two small children. A boy and a girl, no older than 4, holding her hands. Something primal in him stirred, recognition, disbelief, the echo of his own eyes staring back at him from Eli's face. "Good morning," Kendra said smoothly, pretending not to see his shock. "These are my children. They'll sit quietly in the lounge while we discuss the proposal." His throat went dry. "Your children?" She nodded. "Yes. Eli and Aria Hall." He knelt instinctively, unable to stop himself. "Hi there," he said softly. Aria smiled shyly. "Hi." Eli tilted his head, the same way Peter used to when thinking. "You look like Mommy's picture of the man who used to live in a castle." Kendra's breath hitched. Peter's hands trembled. "I used to," he said quietly. "But I lost it." "Why?" the boy asked. Peter's voice broke. "Because I didn't know how to take care of what mattered." Eli nodded, satisfied with the honesty only children understand. Kendra gently took her children's hands. "Go with Aunt Ramona, darlings. I'll be right here." They left, and silence filled the room again, heavy, electric, inevitable. Peter turned to her, voice shaking. "They're mine, aren't they?" Kendra's answer was calm, final. "They're mine, Peter. You just helped write the beginning." He took a step forward, then another, until he stood before her. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You should have told me." "I did," she said quietly. "You just never listened." His knees gave way before he realized what he was doing. He knelt, not out of dramatics, but from the weight of understanding. "I was blind," he said. "I thought power protected me. But you were the only thing that ever made me human." Kendra's eyes shimmered, but her voice stayed steady. "Then stay on your knees, Peter. That's where truth finally found you." For the first time in his life, Peter Smith didn't care who was watching. The boardroom door was open, the city humming beyond the glass walls, but none of it mattered. The billionaire who once ruled from skyscrapers now knelt before a woman he had once fired like a servant. "Get up, Peter," Kendra said softly. "I can't," he whispered. "Not until you know I mean it." "Mean what?" "That I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, fragile and raw. It wasn't the kind of apology born of public pressure or polished speeches. It came from the cracks in his pride, from years of regret that had hollowed him out from the inside. Kendra looked down at him, this man who had shattered her life and now looked like he could barely stand under the weight of his own guilt. "Sorry doesn't rebuild what you destroyed," she said quietly. "It doesn't undo 4 years of silence." "I know," he said, voice hoarse. "I know it doesn't. But tell me what will." Her gaze didn't waver. "Nothing." He closed his eyes, a shudder running through him. "You think money can fix everything," she continued. "It can't buy respect, it can't buy loyalty, and it definitely can't buy forgiveness. Not from me. Not anymore." Peter stood slowly, wiping at his face as if ashamed of the tears threatening to fall. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was scared, of losing everything, of the press, of my reputation. You were the only thing that ever felt real in a world built on performance, and I didn't know what to do with that." Kendra turned away, crossing her arms, staring out at the skyline. "You didn't have to do anything, Peter. You just had to see me. That's all I ever wanted." "I see you now," he said softly. She gave a short, quiet laugh. "Now that I've made something of myself? Now that you need me?" His silence was answer enough. Peter found himself driving without direction. He passed the old mansion, his fortress, his cage, and realized how empty it felt. For years, he'd filled it with noise, parties, meetings, meaningless faces. But without her laughter echoing down those halls, it was nothing but marble and shadows. He parked the car and just sat there, staring at the rain sliding down the windshield. His reflection looked back at him, a man who had everything except peace. For the first time in 4 years, he wished he could start over. At home, Kendra watched the twins sleep. Aria's hand was curled against Eli's shoulder, their breaths soft and synchronized. She sat beside their bed, torn between peace and ache. He'd said he was sorry. He'd cried. But words were easy, she had learned that the hard way. Her heart warred with her reason. Part of her still remembered the man who had once held her like she mattered. The other part remembered the night he'd told her she didn't. She stood, crossing to the balcony. The city lights shimmered below, mirroring her thoughts, beautiful, chaotic, restless. She closed her eyes and whispered, "God, what do I do with a man who finally sees too late?" When Peter showed up at her office the next morning, the receptionist almost didn't believe it. No appointment, no entourage, no arrogance. Just Peter Smith, standing quietly in a gray coat, holding a small box. Kendra's assistant hesitated. "Ms. Hall, Mr. Smith is here." Kendra looked up from her paperwork, her heart tightening. Let him in. He entered slowly. His usual commanding energy was gone, replaced by something gentler, humbler. He placed the box on her desk. "I didn't come to beg," he said. "I came to return something that was never mine to keep." She frowned. "What is it?" He opened it. Inside lay a delicate silver locket, her mother's. She gasped softly. "You left it the night you," his voice faltered, "left the mansion. I found it on the floor the next morning. I kept it. I don't know why." Kendra stared at the necklace, memories crashing over her. Her mother's laughter, her first paycheck, her dream of one day giving her child something to hold on to. Peter's voice broke through her thoughts. "I kept it because I couldn't let go of you. I told myself it was guilt, but it wasn't. It was love. I just didn't know how to handle it without destroying it." She looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time without anger. "Love doesn't destroy, Peter. Fear does." He nodded. "Then let me prove I'm not afraid anymore." "How?" she asked, skeptical. "By being a father. Not a billionaire. Not a savior. Just their father." Kendra's breath caught. "You don't owe me anything," he continued. "You don't even have to forgive me. But let me know them. Let me be part of the world I lost." For days, she thought about it. She remembered the storm, the humiliation, the loneliness of pregnancy. But she also remembered the night he held her like she was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. When she finally agreed to let him meet the twins properly, she didn't do it for him. She did it for them, for the questions they would one day ask. The meeting was quiet, awkward at first. Peter brought no gifts, no promises, only honesty. He sat on the floor with them, drawing with crayons, letting Eli climb into his lap, letting Aria braid his hair with bright pink ribbons. Kendra stood at the doorway, watching. Something in her chest shifted. The man kneeling there wasn't the same one who had thrown her out. He looked smaller, realer, almost human. When the twins ran off to show their drawings, Peter looked up at Kendra. "I don't deserve this moment," he said quietly. "But I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." She didn't answer. But she didn't walk away either. Peter started showing up, not as a visitor, but as a father who meant it. School drop-offs, bedtime stories, simple dinners that tasted better than boardroom meals. He learned to laugh again, to be silly, to be patient. Kendra watched from a distance, guarded but curious. The man who once cared only for headlines now cared about crayons, homework, and bedtime hugs. One evening, as the twins fell asleep on the couch, Peter turned to her. "You don't have to love me again," he said. "But thank you for letting me love them." Kendra's throat tightened. "I didn't do it for you." "I know," he said with a faint smile. "That's why it means everything." But redemption is never simple. A tabloid found out about Peter's secret family. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire's hidden twins." Reporters flooded her office, her home. For the first time in years, Kendra felt powerless again. Peter moved quickly, calling a press conference, taking the blame, shielding her completely. He stood before cameras and said, "I made mistakes that cost me more than money. I failed the woman who saved me when I didn't deserve saving. These children aren't my secret, they're my redemption." Kendra watched it on TV, tears silently tracing her cheeks. He hadn't done it for show. He'd done it to protect her. That night, he showed up at her door, exhausted. "I don't care about the company anymore," he said. "Let it burn if it has to. I just needed to make it right." Kendra stared at him for a long moment. Then quietly, "You did." Weeks passed. The chaos faded. Life found a new rhythm. Kendra still ran her empire. Peter worked to rebuild his name, not for fame, but for purpose. Some nights, he'd come by after meetings, help with the twins' bedtime, and leave without asking for anything. One evening, as they watched the city lights from her balcony, he said softly, "You once told me storms clear the sky. Maybe this was ours." She turned to him. "Maybe." They didn't kiss. They didn't promise forever. They just stood there, two people who had finally grown enough to meet in the middle. For the first time in 4 years, Kendra smiled without pain. The night air smelled of rain again, soft and clean. On Kendra's balcony, the city lights glittered like fallen stars while gentle laughter drifted from inside the apartment. Eli and Arya were building a blanket fort. Peter crouched beside them, pretending to be the giant who'd lost his crown. For the first time, his laughter wasn't forced. It was light, unguarded, real. Kendra watched quietly. For years ago she'd stood in that same kind of night, soaked and abandoned. Now, the storm was only memory. Peter noticed her in the doorway. "You're smiling," he said. "I'm remembering," she replied. "How far a little rain can carry you." He nodded, then hesitated. "I don't expect anything. I just hope you'll let me keep showing up." Kendra stepped beside him, eyes on the twins. "Then keep showing up, Peter. That's all that matters now." They stood together as the twins called for one more story. Peter began to read, his deep voice wrapping the room in calm. Kendra leaned against the balcony rail, listening, the sound of healing, not promises. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere distant, harmless now. 4 years ago, he cast her out into a storm. Tonight, they stand beneath the same sky, no longer enemies, no longer strangers, just two souls finally learning what love means when pride is gone. If this story moved you, don't let it fade when the screen goes dark. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to remember their worth, and subscribe to join us for more stories that touch the soul and remind the world what real humanity looks like.